Lightroom Conversation began as my own exploration of Nepali literature and a curiosity, really, to read stories written especially by women and populations that appear to be overlooked in the larger context of what Nepali literature is or should be. In this bite-sized news world, our conversations have always been purposefully long and deep. We ask our readers to slow down, to be privy to the inner human worlds of writers that sometimes find no space. To start this new season, we decided to document in video and in full our conversation with Niranjan Kunwar, the author of Nepal's first queer memoir in English, Between Queens and the Cities. The format may be new, but the heart of the project is the same. The time spent to excavate, retell, and record the writer's stories and memories is the same. In this episode, we go on a literal journey with Kunwar to his family's garden in Dhulikhel, a childhood space filled with both good and difficult memories, as most childhood spaces are. In our full day together, we talk about the fears and gifts of being queer, rescuing forgotten selves, reauthoring certain dominant narratives, and we explore male anger, the complexities of that emotion that we often do not talk about. What was Niranjan like as a child? I'm curious.
So a child भन्दा like I'm thinking of the different phases and एकदम बच्चा कि अथवा अलिकति ठुलो भएपछि like for example I started boarding school at 9 class 4 मा अनि the interesting thing is म बुढानीको गएको first day पनि I was so excited because to explore that I was like eager to say bye to my parents हुन्छ नि first day किनभने बुढानीको like boarding school plus एकदमै ठुलो जङ्गल जस्तो थियो नि त So मलाई चाहिँ बच्चैदेखि I had this एकदम adventurous streak पनि so मलाई चाहिँ कहिले गएर साथीहरुसित खेलाउँ जस्तो भएको थियो के हैन so I remember एउटा त्यो भयो and even before that or later years बानेश्वरमा पनि पहिला खेतहरू हैन अनि so I was always running around like the neighborhood like with shopkeepers kids like अनि clusters of म फेरि and the other thing is my grandmother used to go to Chitwan त्यति बेला हाम्रो गाउँ थियो हैन and even म 5-6 वर्ष हुँदा पनि I would go with my grandmother to Chitwan like I didn't so because I was so eager to go and Chitwana पनि I would go with to graze cattle in the fields अनि माछा मार्न जाने बच्चामा
So what was
just
there in
running
Chitwan?
around so Chitwan मा चाहिँ so my dad grew up there so from Gulmi to Chitwan he finished his high school in the village school अनि बच्चामा जाँदा पनि we have an old house there अनि थियो तर मलाई चाहिँ I think I was very connected to animals and the गाउँको life and there's a story that my relatives say about how I would say when I grew up I just want to return and be a cowherd or like a villager so I was so connected so in a way I had that streak which was a bit different unusual भनेको I already wanted to be adventurous like and go out in the world like I definitely wasn't attached to my parents in that sense
And or to the idea of like being at home with them.
Yeah.
You wanted sort of.
And that could possibly be because I also have 2 younger brothers so maybe my parents were busy with them all of that so I was that तर as I grew up पछि चाहिँ I have like 2 younger brothers and अरु सानो cousins पनि so I have a lot of younger cousins so I'm like the oldest son in the family although I have cousin sisters who are much older so मलाई पनि like I was known as just rallying up the little bhara bures and like playing a game with them अब त्यति बेला movies Bollywood पनि आइरा थियो हैन so I would do quiz for my भाइ बहिनीहरु so anyway organizing games हैन so in that sense like एकदम रमाइलोको कुराहरु and like I remember lots of gatherings at home. And
Yeah. What were these quizzes like? What would you ask them?
so quiz say it sometimes it was just like film oriented, like Bollywood quiz, like who was the hero of this film kind of. And कहिले काहीँ चाहिँ अलिक general knowledge पनि हुन सक्छ, like capitals of countries यताउति. So that, but then that memory अलिकति punctuated because I was in a boarding school. I also didn't have as much time with my cousins or at home. So I was like back and forth भनौँ न. तर बुढानीकण्ठमा पनि like I remember the early years was just bonding with friends. I think that's how I met people who read and and got into literature, so all of that. So त्यहाँ पनि रमाइलोको कुराहरू, bonding with friends यताउति.
Wait, before we go into Burankanta, you sort of like rushed through that part about you wanting to go to Gaon with your grandma. So this is your dad's mom?
Yeah.
And she's still alive, or?
No, she passed away. And I've mentioned her in the book, like the year I left for the US.
Oh, yeah, of course. And she's, you lived with her though?
Yes, yeah.
When you were younger, she lived with your family. And so how did you, so you would go to the Gaon just with her? Like what did you do that? Whatever you can remember. I'm sure you were young, you were like
So
5.
त्यति बेला त यहाँ 5-7 वर्षमा त, if you can imagine, first त्यो हाइवे नै एकदमै खतम थियो हैन, नारायणघाट जाने बाटो. So it wasn't as easy as this. I still remember local बसमा, नराम्रो बाटोमा, with my grandmother, and I would get really car sick too. But despite that, like I would actually fight with my parents sometimes. I throw a tantrum because I wanted to go, so I would go. And my draw would be just, I think, going away somewhere, but also, as I said, the animals, the गाउँको atmosphere. And for me, I remember that there was no electricity in the गाउँ, so I liked that, like, त्यो के अरे मट्टीतेलको लालटिन बाल्ने हैन, लालटिन बालेर खाने. And like, I mean, some of the delicacies, like I think त्यति बेलाको, I don't know, खट्टे भन्ने, like त्यो भुजियामा घिउ मिसाउने.
हो, हामीले पनि खट्टे भन्छ.
Yeah, I also remember as kids, we don't need a lot, हुन्छ नि, त्यो सानो कुरा brings so much to us, हैन. So mainly त्यही हो, like I would spend a whole month just like running around the village, with my grandmother, हैन. And पछि गएर पनि like, like, and then you don't know how sometimes life can just change drastically, from
so
that
to
like.
Close to her?
But as close as, I mean, I was comfortable with her, like she was loving यताउति,
and so this is just you. Your brothers didn't go. It was like, it was this, that's so special though.
Yeah. So
like if you think about it, right? It was like an escape.
Yeah, and interestingly, so my grandmother was there. She wanted to go, and her, my ठुलो बुवा, my dad's older brother, he was teaching at Rampur College, त्यति बेला, agriculture, which was close to the गाउँ. So we'd also go and stay at his quarter, and so like I was in that sense also became closer with his kids, so cousins or कुरा. But we were all sort of little kids, running around. The त्यति बेलाको just thinking, even the climate, जाडोमा जाँदाखेरि, it just felt so different, like another world, हुन्छ नि. त्यति जाडो नहुने. I remember त्यो कलको पानीहरू, हैन. So all of that, every little thing is like
कलको पानी चाहिँ तातो हुने.
अलिअलि तातो हुने, हैन. But like all those sensations, भनौँ न, that was there.
Do you visit now?
Yeah, so म US बाट फर्केपछि पनि, or even now I love going to Chitwan in the winter, or even reconnecting to the village, so this is the कुराहरू. I feel calmer when I'm in nature, and that was very striking to juxtapose it with my life in New York that I've written about in the book. And अहिले आएर चाहिँ what I can say for sure is I was so zapped by the Western neon lights, club scene, trains, that culture, which had very little space for nature, animals, pets, and I completely and I didn't realize that I was getting so far away from that. Like even the apartments we live in don't have as much greenery, or like, the sidewalk, concrete city, And मलाई चाहिँ I still remember vividly, I had this feeling त्यति बेला न्युयोर्कमा चाहिँ, And even after returning, because like you could frame it in different ways. But I was like, wow, I used to love animals as a kid, and these days I have no feelings for pets or like whatever. So I felt myself hardening. It definitely happened, this hardening that we read about in literature about how city hardens you or like being queer hardens you. Like, people being bitter in life. I definitely had that. किनभने again, अर्को एनिमलको कुरा चाहिँ बच्चामा पनि आई युज टु लभ ह्याभिङ पेट्स लाइक डग्सहरू अनि एकचोटि गाउँमा लाइक लेटर अलिकति ओल्डर टिनेज हुँदाखेरि when I went to the village with my family अनि एकजना ऱ्यान्डम रिलेटिभको घरमा I saw rabbits and I was like I really wanted to bring the rabbits to Kathmandu होइन so I like caused a huge scene and then we brought those rabbits to Kathmandu अनि म बच्चा हुँदाखेरि like I had this even though I was living in boarding school I would like ask for pets. Like we had rabbits at home and puppies.
They poop a lot.
Huh?
Rabbits.
Yeah. And I would like rally my uncles, aunts, and actually feeding the rabbits is a whole other thing. Anyways, I remember all of that going on. And pets pani mo budai ganta like I would call and say how is the pet doing before I asked about my parents. So testo connection थियो But I think I gradually lost that, especially New Year गएपछि. And even after returning, I didn't feel connected to animals here. Like, even though my parents have a dog at home, like I wasn't even paying attention to it. अनि अहिले आएर चाहिँ, I think this year, as I'm staying with my parents and there's a pet, I feel like I'm reconnecting. That's all happening. The whole idea about reclaiming who you are, who you used to be. I mean, this larger sense about returning to.
Absolutely.
This was how I was, and I think when you go out in the world, like you see new things, but you also lose a part of yourself. Like you can't. It's not always about gaining new experiences. I think gaining one, I think you're also losing. Like it's always a give and take. So अहिले आएर चाहिँ I'm thinking I'm in this zone of like who am I really, whatever it is, or your question is also making me think. So I'm like really connecting with the pet dog at home, being in nature, and I definitely don't want lots of parties or alcohol, I don't need that in a way. So it's just interesting to think about like the journey in a way, what happens.
There's this one line in your book. You say sort of the things that you had forgotten, and you had forgotten about the gifts of being queer and the joy of being queer. I know that you say you knew that you were different because you read, right? Like you found yourself. But like, were there moments in your childhood that you felt like this is joy? Like, what was the gift of being queer, and what does that mean? I don't know. You can unpack it however you want, as a child, and then like, what are the gifts of being queer like now? Like, I don't know.
So I think त्यो बेला त्यो लेख्दा चाहिँ I think I was referring more to the idea that, let's say, as I've mentioned in the prologue, like when I came to terms with it myself, one of my first responses was just like, wow, I'm different, like kind of almost this sense of being unique. And this connects to my idea about I've always been curious, adventurous as a child too. So like, wow, there's a lot to explore, find out, knowing that it might be difficult too. So त्यति बेलाको त्यो reference, the idea that it's about owning who you are and seeing what you can do with it, as opposed to conforming or doing the same old thing. So त्यो idea मा चाहिँ, yes, I was like, oh, it's exciting भन्ने कुरा थियो हैन. अनि पछि गएर चाहिँ as things became difficult, I kind of sort of forgot about that. I only thinking about the problems in a way, and not thinking as much about the possibilities. So that was that reference. But we can even go far. So बच्चामा चाहिँ, it was actually, you might be surprised, like I totally grew up being very influenced by my 3 female cousins. I would spend a lot of time with them, and they were also obsessed with Bollywood. So like my whole love for Hindi movies started with that. And I would also used to love wearing their skirts and like dancing for them, So yeah, I definitely had that. It was a very dominant story when I was a kid, as like being feminine, or like like, and that came with यतिकै रमाइलो गर्न पनि to entertain them. They would also encourage me. Like I have actually as a child, like worn a skirt and gone to Chabel Chowk, you know,
That's
to-
a big deal.
to like get like a Hindi movie tape. And so I've done that. Ani,
With the cousins.
with the cousins.
Yeah.
And पछि even at home, like with my parents, यताउति पनि, like there are photos of me dressed as a girl and like dancing, you know, all of that. And in a way, I think that's why adults are पनि, to a certain extent, especially when you're a kid, it's kind of accepted as in, oh, यस्तै त हो, whatever it is, होइन? But then पछि गएर what happens is the question. I think, and that persona, as I entered school and boarding school, I still had that. So boarding पनि, I would dress up as girls and dance, like especially सुरुमा 4, 5, 6 क्लाससम्म चाहिँ like fully enjoying it, होइन?
But how did that go down with the other boys? Or
So what happens is, like, I think real nature, you kind of do that. And when the bullying, teasing happens, then you start questioning and suppressing it. होइन? And that shift usually happens like at pre-teen, like when you are 11, 12, 13, when you start realizing and grappling. And त्यसपछि definitely 13, 14 पछि चाहिँ it becomes difficult when you're really figuring out different things. And त्यति बेला चाहिँ there was a lot of teasing यताउति, and then you start suppressing. So I think my whole repression, etc., started then. So what I've all mentioned, how I was as a child, class 8, 9, 10 पछि चाहिँ I started conforming.
you know, this is so interesting and such a paradox, because हामी जन्मिनेदेखि नै we are told you're a boy or a girl, right? Like त्यो त हुन्छ. And at the same time, I have countless cousins and nephews for whom it is perfectly okay to dress up in a sari and dance in front of family as a show even. Oh, he's going to dance for us, right? And just like you said, at certain point, like let's say they're 10, everyone's just like, now you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what's interesting is that although it is very clear from the beginning, how come there's that gray space of allowance, right? So in some ways, like, as a child, you can sort of be genderless and queer, maybe more for boy children than girl. I don't know how it works, but that there's that allowance too. But then at some point it stops again, right? And then you have to be a man, you have to be a boy. That's really interesting, because it's this narrative of a young boy dressing as a girl and dancing is not uncommon.
Yeah.
You know?
And I don't know, but I'm definitely curious and I wonder about that. And the question to ask, like, हामीले भनेर respond गर्ने भन्दा पनि, it would be interesting to ask either our parents or the grown-ups, like, why is that भनेर. It'd be interesting to say what they would say. I think the common answer is like, oh, it's not accepted in society, or it's just not done, and that's it. But why भन्ने कुरा, and what's accepted, what's not भन्ने कुरा पनि. And that's why, as an educator and a writer, like, I'm more interested in that, to question, to challenge people. किनभने I think it's society, the social norm, it's the dominant discourse भनेर. यसो गर्न हुँदैन, you are a man, men are supposed to do this, women are supposed to do this, it all feeds into. And अब कुरा गर्दै जाँदाखेरि it eventually it's about like patriarchy and like oppression, like who does it benefit, so it goes to that zone.
And I think people rationalize, like my family being now into Tibetan Buddhism, they rationalize it as like a reincarnation thing, or a life before he must have been a girl, and those are just remnants that are just in him now, and that might pass or whatever, so that rationalizing is still there, even on a weird spiritual level.
But I was thinking, for example, different ethnicities, like culturesमा पनि, you deal with it differently. So for example, when you're mentioning about your family, like, I feel like either indigenous or Janjati families, it's in a way more accepted in certain families. Like, for example, I'm thinking about Maruniko chalan cha. Like, I think this tradition in Gurung families or Janjatis, like when we went to Gyachok after the earthquake, I found out about boys dressing up as women, or even men dressing up as women and dancing. is actually an important cultural thing that certain people do that and it's celebrated. But again, how that fits into the larger conversation and the culture is, I don't know if it's investigated. So again, it happens in certain spaces. यति बेला चाहिँ ठिक छ, okay, यति बेला यो ठिक छ, but like not in like real life, त्यस्तो खालको कुरा. But now we are really talking about embodying all of that and going out in the world to, I think, be your true self, whatever that means. त्यसैले पनि to keep on asking these questions and talking is important.
I was trying to think, like, you said you read stuff as a young kid. Like, what did you read or what did you see in like magazines, or like, was there anything that sort of affirmed like who you were, kind of, or that felt like promising, or you wanted, like, was there anything that you read or seen?
So त्यो पनि अब again the reading पनि कहाँबाट सुरु भयो. For example, it might start as early as at home, your grandmotherहरू reading, talking about like Mahabharata, Ramayana, like, or we watching it, like this whole idea about stories, narratives. Like I remember, like I was quite taken early on, अनि के अरे, so I remember यो स्वस्थानी भन्ने चलन पनि, like every evening you read a chapter during this month, So I was also really into it, and I would actually read the parts. And now again, like I don't want to necessarily analyze or reflect on what was happening because there's still unknown. But I wonder, त्यति बेला नै that's opening possibilities, like, like, oh, यस्तो भएको थियो, like, God's chopping off heads, or like people reincarnating, becoming different. That immediately is a message that you can change your form, or travel somewhere else, or like have magic powers, What does that mean for kids, भन्ने कुरा is interesting. Until that gradually starts building into, then I encountered Western literature. That's a whole different thing. It's literally about different countries, actually humans living very different lives. And that opens up different kinds of possibilities. अनि पछि चाहिँ, but I'm also thinking, when you ask about reading, मलाई चाहिँ, again, the whole pop culture or Bollywood, I mean, मेरो टिनमा फेज, like I've joked with certain friends saying, oh, I did my PhD in 90s Bollywood भनेर, and somebody actually thought it was true. But I still say that, my 90s को Bollywood, like A to Z थाहा छ भने जस्तै के. If you ask me 1993 मा कसले फिल्मफेयर अवार्ड बेस्ट एक्टर पायो, होइन, like शाहरुख खान for बाजीगर, so I know that. So त्यो चाहिँ I was literally like, I know it by heart. I was so into it.
But these were just like magazines you were looking at, or like like TV?
So TV, CV, Tora, this was before internet, for example. And by the way, I would buy every single Filmfare magazine from like for the few years. Filmfare movie one. So like I think it's all thrown out now. I would collect it. So every month go Filmfare I had it, and it was, whether you call it reading pop culture, looking at glamour, or like or stars being themselves, and also movies also opens up imaginations in a way. Like even fashion in that sense is about being someone else, that and all of that is queer in a way. So that was also going on. That was very much a part of my life, and with my certain close friends, like, and with the female cousins, we were all into Bollywood and movies, So that was going on, and I also lost some of that after going abroad, and now
so when
again
you were
reclaiming
looking at
it.
these magazines, were you looking at Shah Rukh Khan being like, oh, I want to be like him, or like, was there any kind? What was the relationship? I like that idea of like glamour, right? It's sort of it's a shift, it's a transformation, right? Like, I don't know. Did you? Or with these cousin sisters of yours, like how?
I mean, now I'm thinking what it was really about, other than sometimes just like it could just be teenage fixation, where it's just that and nothing deeper in a way. And you're just fixated on something, like obsessed with it, And now I'm like, wow, like I used to watch all those terrible movies, or like, why did I listen to all those songs, you know? It's also, हाम्रो त्यति बेलाको 90s काठमाडौँमा चाहिँ, it was also because there was just a lack of anything else, you know. So अरू केही कुरै थिएन. Nepal didn't have Nepal TV. अब 6 बजे like 2-3 घन्टा हुन्थ्यो हैन. So अरू outletै छैन. So I think as kids growing up, teenagers, I'd never left the country, you know. So just to find that outlet somewhere about, like, I don't know what kids or teenagers need, and that's what I got and consumed, you know. But that's also, so there, in a way. As we're talking about this, I'm also thinking what Alok Vedmanan said. You're also in that workshop, I think. It's really stayed with me, and it's very powerful, you know, that question for queer people especially. And I think for any marginalized group, for women, I think it applies. What did you have to destroy in order to survive in this world? I think we all have to do that. And it's a sad thing, हैन? तर मलाई चाहिँ, even today, I know like what parts of myself did I really suppress or destroy or kill to just go through life, and whether I'll ever be able to reclaim it. So I think my feminine side, I had to actively suppress. So I think your whole in this conversation, whether it's Bollywood, Filmfare, you know, like dancing as girls, like I think I have it in me. And I'm definitely not ashamed or whatever. Like if anything, and that relates to your other question about the gifts of being gay. It's like, I think it's a really cool, powerful thing. It's if an individual can be both a man and a woman, like, you know, like that's a skill, like, you know. And I think if anyone could do that, that would be so great in a way. That's actually what's needed, I feel like, your world way, you know, the fluidity rather than the rigidity and the labels and fixed ideas. We need a lot of like connections, questioning. So part of that is, even I don't know, like I wonder if, oh my God, I haven't showed you some photos, like that'd be amazing. There was one time that I dressed up in drag in New York by a professional artist, and like that photo is not out publicly yet, but I've shown it to my friends. That त्यति बेला पनि, again, that now I'm thinking about, like I only did it once for a friend's bachelor party, and even during that time I was not completely at ease, but it was a complete like professional, you know, drag shoot. So this is the कुराहरु. I think the flip side of that question is, you know, how much fear and anxiety there is for marginalized people, you know. Again, starting with women, like I think the anxiety that women have to live with in this world, you know, is like queer people relate to that, but slightly different, but there are also intersections. So because of that, so many things is hidden, like invisibilized, you know, not talked about. And that's why I really appreciate younger Nepalis now who are bolder than I could be or I have been, who are out there in the public, you know. And they are doing that a lot. So
yeah, I think that's beautiful, to be able to be both. Like, what's better than that? So I've been wanting to ask you, memoir भनेको त अब non-fiction हो, हैन? Which means it's real. It can be taken as fact खालको जस्तै बुझिन्छ, हैन? And it's so close to you and your life and the people in your life, which also includes your family and friends? Like, I guess like मैले चाहिँ mostly fiction लेखेर अब even non-fiction लेखे पनि I can fictionalize it and always be like, well, it's fiction, right? So like, how do you, as a non-fiction writer, or for this memoir specifically, how do you know what to reveal, what to conceal? How do you balance that?
So on revealing and concealing, the whole point, the whole main idea about why I wrote is to consciously be like, this story needs to be documented. It's like visibilizing it almost, right? Because I think queer history in general, being invisible, hidden, no one talks about it, secret.
Yeah.
So now one of the most important, I think, political movements or political ideas would be to visualize anything, to come out, to claim it, to own it, to not be afraid, to not be ashamed, to claim the space. So in that sense, it was important in a real non-fiction way to say, yes, I'm being visible in a way almost.
But you chose to not, like, even though you wrote about some of these characters are real people in your life, you chose to change their names. Was there, like, what drove that decision? Because in part, that's also fictionalizing to a degree, right?
I think the decision to write about somebody comes with ethical issues, right? Like people may not be want written about. Like you ask for permission, all of that,
Yeah.
I didn't go that way because I knew I wasn't going to reveal very personal stuff. So it was meant to be more describing my surrounding. But the tricky thing with family is, on one hand, because it's so enmeshed and complex, I wouldn't know how to ask for permission, what to write, what not to write. And again, the things I've included is usually more sensitive stuff. So there's already, issues around it.
Yeah.
But then the interesting thing was, this leads to the question of why I wrote, and why was it important?
Yeah.
Like the short answer would be like, you write about things that give you very strong feelings. And it's a language, we use in primary school classroom to teach kids, as in just don't write about things you don't care about. We write about things we care about. That gives us strong feelings and that,
Yeah.
And especially during that phase as I was writing, let's say a transitional phase in my life, late 30s, whatever, when you're facing the big questions in life, the issues that really bothered me or that I was really thinking about had to do with certain, the family dynamics.
Yeah.
And as I was writing it, I didn't even think as consciously about whether I should write about it. Like, I just knew I had to, and it just came out. Like, so I wasn't thinking too much or even censoring myself, because it felt so much like it has to be written,
Yeah. The father character, though, like, my experience of reading your memoir, when I got to the part where you wrote about the father character in the memoir, right? And sort of like his behaviors, how he is with his family. It's funny, I think I remember feeling as a reader like a little bit scared, and I don't know how much of it was like my own relationship to my own father and my family, but like I was scared of that father figure. And I don't know how much of that for you as you were writing or revising, like how much of that you concealed or embellished, or like how did you work with that character? Because there's I mean, you very explicitly talk about anger, right? Both your father's and your own, and maybe even your brother's. And I was very intrigued to, like as a reader, it really like pulled me in, because I don't think we talk about anger as much as perhaps we should.
Like I really struggled in the sense I remember being like having a lot of anger and just frustration, like despair, distress during those years, and it would just short circuit to just one person. You know what I mean? Like even though he was so far away, like so there was a time when I got really hungry, for example, in New York, I would get angry at my father.
Hungry, like physically hungry, you'd get angry.
So I'm just giving you an example. If I
Yeah.
missed a train, I would immediately think of my father and get like rage at him, and that I knew was not quote unquote normal, because he's not even there. It's not his fault. So what is this about? So that needed investigation.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, when emotions don't get processed properly, or when there's repression, maybe, or when there hasn't been a history of talking about, so it's actually my repressed stuff coming out in a way.
Yeah.
So in a way, I knew that I had to just understand it more or write about it, etc. And in some sense, it wasn't fair to him, and in some ways, it was my fault too. It's no one's fault, like just me being angry.
Yeah.
So it's in that different things interconnected. So it's basically writing being you're putting things in front of you and sifting through it to understand it more, looking at it more.
Yeah.
So I think that's what that is in a way too. So, and then when I went to see a therapist, like some of it became a little visible.
Yeah.
But then, as I said, some of it was just my fault and my situation at that point, like just living in New York teaching was stressful. So I was just angry because of the circumstances,
Yeah.
Or I was drinking too much, and that also contributes to anger and emotions. So some of those I had to take responsibility and just sort of tease it apart.
To me, it's so interesting, this again, this theme of anger that we see in our everyday lives, we see in our family members, we see in us, right? And we don't perhaps write about it, talk about it. It's oftentimes the straight male of the family who gets to be very angry, and then it's like the big elephant in the room, and nobody really talks about it, right? And because nobody talks about it, they continue to get to be angry, and then we continue to just quietly sort of accept that. Like my own father is a very gentle man, and he's got a lot of wisdom, especially now as he's much older. But he would be the first to admit that as a young man he was hot-blooded, and in the village his entire family was known to be like super angry,
His entire family.
Yeah, just like this. Like, to me, to imagine a family that's just angry, like every member is just like, that's what they're driven by. That's how they move in the world. It's fascinating, like that it passes. So something in that passes down and passes across, right?
Yeah, and I've really thought about that too, especially in my context, is like, why, like at that time that I was talking about, why did I have that rage, And some of the answers are easier to understand, as in, yes, because the world being unjust, or as a queer person, there's no space, so I'm angry about that. And I've written a little bit about velvet rage, etc. That's easier to understand, but but I had more like deeper, like, darker, like anger, hopelessness, despair, and so during those moments, I've thought about, is it like how much of this is genetic or like chemical that I can't just change, that I'm born with it? Because I was also known to be an angry child, like I would throw tantrums, etc. Like very angry, like somebody being like extremely, so I was like, maybe it's something I can't control, etc. So I was thinking of that. But then I know about my father, I know about frustrations, all of that. So I'm still curious.
Talking about the father character, there were moments of tenderness too, right? Like when he comes back to the room the next day, when he tries to say goodnight.
Yeah.
Like that's a gesture, that's a language. Yes, maybe it's not enough, to undo or fix certain deeply seated sort of hurt. But in some ways, as we talked about early in the morning, like doing the best we can with what we have,
Yeah.
you know?
And also there's this whole thing about, especially with your parents, like just forgiveness and
Yeah.
acceptance, you know. It's also easier to continue to stay angry and not have a relationship in some ways.
Yeah, yeah.
The harder thing is to choose to,
Because it's easier to just blame, like you said.
Yeah.
Like, I'm angry because of this person.
so I've been studying Vedic, not studying, but just like watching YouTube videos, trying to understand Vedic astrologies. Briefly, the 9 major planets, and when they say, or heavenly bodies, including the sun and the moon, and the 12 constellations, which are our, houses and all of that, and the interactions between them, right? So it's like so many possibilities, and something is passing, something is transiting, how when some certain planets come together, all of that. So just recently, Mars entered Aries, okay?
Okay.
So December 22, Mars transited to Aries. And that's considered one of the better transits because Mars rules Aries
Okay.
and it's in its house. So it's like dignified. So, so sometimes when planets are in a house that doesn't suit them, their powers are debilitated. Whereas in other, it's like, more potent, dignified. Plus, if there are other planets, something else happens, etc. So it's a good thing. But Mars is a warrior planet.
Okay.
And Aries is a fire sign.
Okay.
Okay. So already you can think of connotations, what might happen. What does that imply?
It's wild. It's going to be wild.
Something like that. So my Tuesdays, my horoscope was try to avoid a hot-headed person in your family because this is not a good time. And on Tuesday, I had like a huge fight with my dad and we were both hot-headed. And this could just be coincidence, whatever. But anyway, that happened, right? But so that's like the specific connection, and I can tell you more about the implications here. But Mars, the good thing about Mars is it has a lot of energy. It's warrior. It like goes out. It gets things done. It defends. So I had this slight anxiety about this whole memoir, right? Especially because it's been a long time, and like my relationship with my dad has slightly shifted. It's better. When I was writing it, it was almost like I don't care about anything in the world. Like I literally felt like I'm leaving New York, so like anything can happen. So I was taking this big risk. So at that time, that's why I did not care about what I was writing.
But that was so important that you did not care.
Yeah, that I had to tell this story,
Absolutely.
Honestly, etc.
Yeah.
And later, again, the slight anxiety started, and it was still brewing. Even throughout the launch, etc., I was like, so I haven't told the full details to my dad, how he's going to take it, all of that. But then that's also kind of sad. It's like I've written this book, but I can't even share it, and like I can't even celebrate it. Like I have to be anxious about it, And that's the queer aspect about just the nature of the whole thing. But after Tuesday's blowout, it's almost like that anger ate up the anxiety. And I rose a few notches up, saying, I was able to rise above all of this. I feel like, at least for now, I have that stance, saying that I was able to own it more and like be almost like braver, as in, it's like
Instead of being
anxious, a little
or
scared, guilty, all of that. I was more fully like, okay, this, so the other thing with anger is, and I don't know how true this is, maybe it's different for different people, but some people have told me, when I get really angry and like say things to somebody, I'm also my most honest and articulate, And maybe not always, but I say things that needs to be said, or, and people are like, oh, now I know, kind of, as opposed to trying to be diplomatic, polite. It's like you're kind of beating around the bush and not doing anything. So to get to the heart of the matter, sometimes it's like anger is the shortcut or almost the right way. Maybe not in every circumstance, but especially with volatile situations. So for example, what I've written about in the book, during the visit, the outburst,
Yeah.
that was really the first time. So my entire, the distressing anxiety in New York, it needed an outlet. And I can go even further. Like I grew up like never really being able to express myself because I was so afraid and just like bottled up,
Yeah.
And that continued throughout New York, I think. And what happened in New York was like, instead of having outlet, I found other things like alcohol, clubbing,
I
dancing,
see.
which again, the feelings were there, but like I was just here.
Distracted.
And later this became, it was superficial, so it crumbled. So this really came up. And that needed an outlet. So that's why when I had the outburst, it was very healthy for everyone. And mostly for me, I literally had this sense of like breaking something and opening out finally, coming out of a box. And my father too, I haven't written that part, but the next day he actually said this was the first time he'd seen this side of me. And especially as an adult, he was seeing me after 5 years, Like I had changed like from a college student to a 29-year-old,
Yeah.
So for him too, he was like, wow, he said something like that was really necessary and important. I'm glad that happened, something like that. He kind of understood the necessity of this.
Yeah.
He's saw that side. So yeah, the uses of anger in that sense, I mean, it's not like an example we can use everywhere, but anyways, it has these sides too. So I feel like I was maybe going somewhere else with this too. Yeah, so yeah, I was talking about how after I got recently angry, because I think this whole lockdown too, so I've reconnected with my parents, I've gone back, right? So I was trying to preserve the peace in a way, like, walking around tiptoes, I don't need to engage, etc. And I don't have hope for complete understanding or for anyone to understand my perspective.
I mean, you launched the book when you were at home with them, and they were in the house, but they had no clue.
Like they
what
don't
that
know
was
the
then.
details, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that I feel like that's also a resistance, queer resistance in a way, or like a strategy, which is also slightly interesting to talk about. I mean, writing the book could also be a resistance in a way.
Right.
You're like resisting the dominant discourse, putting it out there. But I was just saying, yeah. So I realized I was just like not being completely true, like being okay with him yelling or like doing other things, just like ignoring. But this time, the day before, thanks to Mars entering Aries, I was like, bah, like, and after that, and my response has also been different. I'm surprised myself. Other times I might feel guilty. It's like I felt really justified, Sure, like the violence of it is not okay maybe, but I didn't feel guilty or afraid or whatever. I was like, that needed to happen.
I was going to say that felt necessary in this moment.
And that also sort of threw a light on this book and my anxiety, saying, oh, then why am I being anxious about all of this? This is like a good thing needed to happen. And I've told my story responsibly. So this is making me think that I think that's when the accountability thing comes up, is like, yes, if parents are angry or have anger issues, I think I would be okay with people, or especially with my father, if you have an anger issue or if you have an outburst, then you must fix it, or you must fix what you break, So I think my biggest thing has been, if only he knew how to be like, once, you are angry or you yell at someone, to kind of come back and be like, sorry, or like, okay, that wasn't right.
Yeah.
That just does not happen.
That does not happen. The thing about apology.
And that's my biggest issue even now, in a way, what I mean?
One of my favorite conversations in the Lightroom conversation has been with poet Niva Shah. And she said that she's realized that we're not taught how to love, neither in school or at home, and that we need that education. And I found that so powerful.
No, I think that's why I think, again, my wanting to be a primary school teacher is around that, because one of my first encounters in the US was like a preschooler, like in the classroom. actually learning these things through picture book stories, the community, how you treat each other. Those were very important in certain progressive schools in New York. And I immediately saw that it was completely lacking in my life or Nepal, or like I'd never seen anything like that. And that's why I was like, wow, like this is so important.
Yeah.
And it really moves me and touched me. I mean, and that's where it starts, like when you think about family dynamics or Nepali politics or the larger sphere, I really maintain that it starts in primary school classroom. If you don't learn how to listen to other kids or respond to somebody's comment respectfully, and if it doesn't happen throughout schooling, you're not going to automatically learn inside parliament. And it's too late by then,
Absolutely.
Or after you get married, like you're not going to learn that. And there's other things in life.
Absolutely.
So that's also why I know like our parents did not have that education or the opportunity, or the exposure. So it's something that we just have to carry with us and just try to do better.
I think what I've realized in our conversations today is just that त्यो भन्छ नि ए मान्छेलाई चिनेपछि त्यो भन्दा बढी चिन्नु नै छैन भन्ने एक प्रकारको त्यो आइडिया जस्तो हुन्छ नि it's so false, that there are pockets and depths and that overlooked corner that you didn't see, or it also depends on the timing of the day, the moment, where you are, how old you are, like all of that. So thank you for spending this day with me. Thank you for taking us to your childhood spaces quite literally and also through stories. And thank you always for being so generous with both your time and your words.
It's a pleasure. And as I think you rightly said, it's about intentions again, and making time to know somebody. And I think if you have that, there's so much to explore. I think especially as writers and educators, I believe that there are so many aspects of our lives that we can engage with, You two don't know what you have been missing. 2009.
This is you? Oh wait, how comfortable do you feel like about like this part to interview my just picture on
I think to get more likes we have to use. If not now, when? This is my Bollywood moment.